top Chinese official says U.S. is not qualified to be human rights defenders due to high incidence of gun-related crimes. Tunisia is making efforts to produce its own locally made COVID-19 vaccine following a growing concern over the shortage of vaccine on the continent. And the rugby team in Uganda is making preparations for the final African berth to Tokyo Olympic Games. These and more coming on The World Today. To stay with us. Good evening, viewers. You're watching The World Today newscast here on Africa TV with me, Sohna Tunkara, and now to our news in detail. China's foreign ministry spokesperson has categorized the United States as a nation not fit enough to call itself as a human rights defender. Zhou Lajian made this remark on Wednesday while speaking of the extremely high incidence of gun-related crimes in the U.S. Details of that in this report.
The desire to live freely under a government that respects and protects fundamental freedoms and human rights was the primary motivation of the founders of the United States. However, as years passed by, this principle of freedom is slightly fading away due to a series of inhuman and uncalled for actions that are systematically surfacing. According to Zhou, the spokesperson of Chinese Foreign Ministry, the year 2020 served as the deadliest gun violence. In the first 5 months of 2021, gunfire killed over 8,100 people in the U.S., meaning about 54 lives were lost per day.
The rate of gun violence-related crimes in the U.S. has remained high over the past years, ranking #1 in the world. This is only the tip of the iceberg of the long-standing human rights problems in the United States, including racism, police violence, child labor, and forced labor. George Floyd's choking cry of "I can't breathe" remains a sobering call. Asian Americans are still traumatized by discrimination and attacks, and the rights of 500,000 child frame workers are not guaranteed. Is this the city upon the hill or beacon of human rights the U.S. claims to be? If one can't even keep his own house in order, how can we expect him to make the world better?
Despite the lack of respect and disregard for human rights, U.S. continues to drag its influence across the world, especially in developing countries. For decades, the United States has been imposing sanctions on countries and international bodies on the basis of human rights violation. The trend continues even in the Biden administration, which Zhou described as a pretext to pressurize countries and interfere in their internal affairs.
The U.S. not only turns a blind eye to its domestic human rights violence, but also uses human rights issues as a pretext to exert pressure on other countries and interfere in their internal affairs. The U.S. is ill, but still pretends to be a doctor who takes the pulse and comes up with a prescription for others. Hiding one's trouble and taking no remedial measures often makes the illness incurable. Facts have repeatedly proved that the U.S. has no rights to act as a defender of human rights. Some U.S. politicians had better put their own house in order before meddling in other countries' internal affairs under the pretext of human rights.
Racial discrimination in America over the years has posed a series of chaotic scenes which led to loss of life and left many in critical conditions. Last year, the Black Lives Matter campaign sparked protests across the U.S. and around the globe over the death of an African-American, George Floyd, in the hands of a white police officer. The Black Lives Matter becomes the largest movement in the history of America as it seeks to end racial discrimination and injustice. In a similar vein, hundreds of New Yorkers condemned anti-Asian hate crimes following a deadly attack which saw 8 Asian women lose their lives during a series of shootings that took place at spas in Atlanta in March this year. These unprecedented killings, according to many, is the urge for white supremacy. For African News, Sohna Tunkara.
China's foreign ministry spokesperson says the U.S. is not fit to be called human rights defenders. Now, Tunisia is making efforts to produce its own locally made COVID-19 vaccine, following a growing concern over the shortage of the vaccine on the continent. Africa strives to vaccinate 60% of its 1.3 billion people as quickly as possible. But in order to attain that, the continent must develop its capacity to produce COVID-19 vaccine. We have more of that in this report.
Hisham Mishishi appealed to the health body at a meeting in Geneva to speed up vaccine provision in order to accelerate the vaccination rollout in the North African country.
Inequalities in vaccine distribution between industrialized and developing countries is alarming. The result is that some countries are resuming normal life thanks to the vaccine rollout, while other countries like Tunisia, which is facing big economic difficulties, is still taking restrictive measures which deepen the socio-economic crisis and further paralyze the economy.
The Director General of the World Health Organization said WHO is willing to dispatch a team of experts to Tunisia in order to evaluate the country's readiness for COVID-19 vaccine production.
Tunisia is proposing that to partner with WHO to start local production, and we have agreed to for our teams to work together, and whenever Prime Minister is ready, we can send a team to Tunisia that specialize experts on local production to help Tunisia.
Following a meeting with the Tunisian Prime Minister, the Director General of the World Trade Organization declared that it supports Tunisia's quest for local vaccine production.
We have discussed how to help with the production of vaccines in Tunisia, because Tunisia has the ecosystem and the competencies to produce it. It's quite complicated. We've had the head of the Pasteur Institute in Tunis who's explained the whole ecosystem. The WTO is following up with the WHO on the whole vaccine production chain and looking for ways to facilitate this operation in Tunisia.
Tunisia has rolled out more than 1.4 million vaccines, while the number of people who have registered on the national vaccination platform evax.tn has reached 2.4 million since the start of the vaccination campaign 4 months ago. The scientific committee of the Tunisian Health Department has warned that the lack of access to vaccines in developing countries and low-income nations would not just exacerbate global financial and health inequalities, but would hinder progress already made in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic.
Tunisia is set to produce its own COVID-19 vaccine. Now, coming back home, offloading of the cargo of Japanese rice shipment to the Gambia began on Monday for onwards distribution to various sales points across the country. The Gambia government announced in May that more than 3,000 metric tons from Japan will be commercialized. Proceeds from the sales of the rice will then be plugged back to the agricultural sector, according to the agreement between the two countries. Here's an excerpt by Abba Jibril Sankare, focal person for the Japan-Gambia Rice Project.
The most recent one is they call it the underprivileged, project, KR2 underprivileged farmers project for the underprivileged farmers. I could remember the overall cost of that project was about 100 and something million. So those, if you could remember last year, equipments we are bought, fertilizers we are bought, so many things we are bought through that project. So last week, 50 tractors we are also bought from the same proceed, from the state KR proceed.
The 50 tractors that the government launched to the farmers?
Yes, that was inaugurated by the government of the Gambia. Because as you can see, you people, we are covering it. You can see the Japanese ambassador addressing online. And you can hear the president expressing their appreciation to the people of the Japan. So this is how this project works. Any proceed, we apply it back to the Gambian people.
What is likely to be the next project to be written as a result of proceed from the rice?
Well, it depends on what we need as far as Gambian farmers are concerned. The Ministry of Agriculture will also go, and there's a team. They will sit and look at, what is the most pressing need. One thing I can tell you, I remember I made that proposal to our former APS that we need to build warehouses from this KR2, across the region. Even 2 warehouses at central level here, so that whenever this consignment comes, we will not have the issue of, a warehouse. I propose that to our PS.
Does it have a deadline? When is it likely to be executed or approved? Or?
No, I don't think. As the moment everything is completed here, the Japanese will need, statement from the government of the Gambia concerning the consignment, and then they will tell them how much is deposited in the account. Then when they are satisfied with everything, then the government of the Gambia can think of any bankable project, and then come up with the proposal, share it, with the experts, on the ground, and then later to the Foreign Affairs, because this thing, as I mentioned, it always goes through the Foreign Affairs Ministry.
Offloading of the cargo of Japanese rice shipment
reason one
began on
is the quality underprivileged.
Now, the government of the Gambia has on Wednesday received a donation of 100 metric tons of rice from the government of Pakistan. The donation, according to officials, was made to express support to the Gambian people in the wake of food shortage. Fatmata Kasim takes us through.
Figures appears to show acute malnutrition at 10.3%, while 23% of children are stunted or small for their age. The Gambia's poverty rate remains at 48%, while food insecurity has risen from 5% to 8% over the past 5 years as a result of weak food production system and the effects of successive shocks such as drought and floods. In 2018, the Gambia suffered another drought leading to a food security emergency. The Pakistani ambassador to the Gambia said the donation was made to support the Gambian people that have been affected by the food shortages.
As you know, that we have assembled here to express our care and support to the Gambian people who have been affected by the food shortages, initially due to the 2018 drought, and later due to the COVID-19 pandemic related slump in economy. So in these circumstances, the government of Pakistan has decided to gift 100 metric tons of rice to the government of Gambia. The gift of rice is being handed over to Gambian government in this ceremony today. This gift of rice not only reflects the brotherhood between the Pakistani and the Gambian people, but also displays the responsibility and the commitment of the Pakistani government towards our African friends. We hope that this small gift will contribute to the Gambian government's efforts to ensure the food security in Gambia.
While receiving the donation on behalf of the Gambia, the Secretary General and Head of the Civil Service, Noah Toure, thanked the Pakistani government for the laudable gesture.
It is a laudable gesture and we highly appreciate it, because the donation will go a long way in helping us deal with the food shortages that has been experienced in some parts of the country, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The rice we have shown you that it will be passed to the people who need it most, and we want to express our sincere appreciation and gratitude. This is just one area of cooperation between the Gambia and the government of Gambia and the government of Pakistan. There are other areas which we are aware of, in which cooperation is happening, in the area of foreign affairs, in the area of defense, in the area of security. These are all very good, especially in the area of agriculture, which we appreciate so much. And we hope that the cooperation, the level of cooperation will grow further and strengthen in the years to come.
In July 2020, the WFP Gambia embarked on supporting the government to shift from face-to-face approach to remote data collection to ensure continued monitoring of the food security situation of households and market prices in the Gambia during the COVID-19 pandemic. The continuous mobile data collection covers all the regions in the country. According to reports, there has been stability in the food security situation, with the growing trend of households showing improved food consumption. For iAfrica News, I am Fatoumata Kasim.
Gambia continues to receive food support from foreign donors. Now in South Africa, in an effort to help the underprivileged with food security, an entrepreneur is running a hydroponic farm on an urban rooftop. Zandeli Commando's hydroponic rooftop farm also seeks to boost the local community, as the fresh produce will be sold to restaurants and local communities around townships. Details of that in this report.
Zandile Kumalo is running the first Sentin hydroponic rooftop farming project. It's quite a unique project that is helping the underprivileged with food security. Hydroponic technology allows for the crops to be grown without soil in special water solutions.
So the advantage of hydroponic farming is that you can get much more yield. You can be able to plant within a smaller space. You can be able to plant without soil. And everything that you use is basically on a neutral base, because the medium that we use is not soil. It's soilless farming. We use cocoa peat. Our approach is clean.
Zandile Kumalo is one of the few young black hydroponic farmers here. Her hydroponic farm is in the middle of one of the most affluent areas here in South Africa.
The location was that, we used to bring produce here in Sentin and cities, and therefore leafy greens is one of the things that can be found so